had something really exciting to share with you, and this is from the Tel Hebron Archaeological Park in Admot, Ishay neighborhood in Israel. And it says Tel Hebron is an ancient archaeological site and a residential neighborhood in the city of the patriarchs and matriarchs. Tel Hebron is an ancient archaeological site in a residential neighborhood in Hebron. The residential section is referred to as Admot, Ishay, and consists of several caravan-style homes. Within the residential section is an archaeological site known as Tel Hebron. Archaeologists and Bible scholars believe that the patriarchs Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the matriarchs Sarah, Rebecca, and Leah, who are buried in the nearby tomb of the Machpelah, lived in this area almost 4,000 years ago. A 3-meter high wall can be seen in the neighborhood, which is estimated to be 4,500 years old, dating back to the days of the biblical Noah. Studies show it was originally 10 meters high and 6 meters deep. Opposite this wall is another one built 3,700 years ago during the days of Abraham. Between the two walls are stone stairs dating back 4,000 years. Archaeologists postulate that the original gate of the ancient Hebron might be found by digging under the present-day street where the stairs end. This may be the gates of Hebron mentioned in the Bible, where Abraham purchased the cave of the Machpelah and surrounding field for the Jewish people, as stated in Genesis chapter 23. Under the present-day Beit Menachem building, the ruins of an old Jewish home dating back 4,000 years are displayed. The columns were built 2,700 years ago during the days of King Hezekiah in the First Temple period, and this is the location where the king's seal was discovered. This stone artifact features the ancient Hebrew words Elimelech, or to the king, and Hebron, which in Hebrew is Hebron. Other finds include a wine press and a granary. On the top of the hill is the tomb of Jesse and Ruth, an ancient burial site for the father and grandmother of King David. Some researchers hypothesize that because of the strategic hilltop location, this may be the site of King David's palace when he ruled Hebron as the first capital of Judea. Isn't that exciting? In Arabic, the site is referred to as Tel Rumeda, which comes from the word for ash gray, a reference to a fire that occurred in the area. In 1984, the government of Israel gave the Jewish community permission to build a residential section. In May of 1811, Rabbi Chaim Yeshua HaMitzri, nicknamed Chaim the Egyptian Jew, made the second of 2 land purchases on behalf of the community through the Magen Avot organization. This area encompassed 800 dunam of land, including the area of Tel Hebron and the tomb of Ruth and Jesse. Isn't that amazing that they have the tomb of Ruth and Jesse? Today, the tombs feature a small synagogue and study hall, along with archaeological finds, such as a stone building dating back about 1,500 years that may have been a synagogue. Many writers and historians from past generations have mentioned visiting the tombs, with several reporting that an underground tunnel might connect it to the tomb of Machpelah. Professor Philip C. Hammond directed the American expedition to Hebron. The excavations took place on the southern side of the Tel, which is a mound, and uncovered the king's seal. In 1999, the Tel Hebron excavations took place from April to September and uncovered the steps. They were headed by Emanuel Eisenberg from the Israeli Antiquities Authority. In 2014, excavations began at Tel Hebron, sponsored by the Israeli Antiquities Authority, with involvement from the Culture and Sports Ministry and the Civil Administration. Emanuel Eisenberg returned to the excavation together with Professor Shlomo Ben David from Ariel University. In 2018, the official Tel Hebron Archaeological Garden was open to the public. Now I'll take you to this continuation. The tomb of Ruth and Jesse, great-grandmother and father of King David. I said grandmother, I meant great-grandmother. For generations, Jewish people have visited the tomb of Ruth and Jesse. Today, the refurbished site attracts thousands, especially on Shabbat. The tomb of Jesse and Ruth is the ancient site in Hebron that marks the burial locations of the father and great-grandmother of King David. The book of Ruth begins with the story of Naomi, a Jewish woman who travels with her family to Moab to escape a famine. After the death of her husband and sons, she decides to return to the land of Israel. Her daughter-in-law, Ruth, a Moabite, rather than let Naomi leave alone, chooses to follow her and join the Jewish people. Ruth is considered the paradigm of hesed, or kindness, and a template for the conversion to Judaism. In chapter 1, verse 16 of the book of Ruth, she speaks the famous phrase, "Wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God." She later marries Boaz and gives birth to Obed, father of Jesse, father of David. For generations, people have visited the site known as the tomb of Ruth and Jesse, located in the Admot, Ishay, Tel Hebron neighborhood of Hebron, at the top of a hill overlooking a vineyard. The old stone building today houses a small synagogue, prayer room, and an alcove with stone artifacts that have yet to be thoroughly excavated. The roof provides a panoramic view of the old city. Rabbinic tradition describes Jesse as one of 4 righteous men who died free of sin, and one of the 10 who entered the Garden of Eden during their lifetime. This could be an allusion to Jesse's burial in Hebron, as the cave of Machpelah is described as an entrance to the Garden of Eden. Wow. Ever since the Middle Ages, Jewish travelers have sought out this site as a holy place. Legends speak of a tunnel that links the tomb of Jesse with the tomb of Machpelah. The authenticity of the site has been attested to by Rabbi Yitzhak Luria, the Holy Ari. An ancient structure to the west of the Tel Hill, facing Jerusalem, has been identified as a synagogue. As of 2016, furniture and electricity have been installed in the cave-like structure, and Jewish prayer services are held. On the Jewish holiday of Shavuot, it is traditional to read the book of Ruth, and many follow the custom of ascending to the tomb of Ruth and Jesse for this purpose. A 2010 Jerusalem Post article entitled "Converts pay homage to Ruth at her Hebron tomb states, thousands visit the tomb annually, particularly around Shavuot. On the afternoon of the festival, hundreds of people from the area visit the site, which has a garden and a small sanctuary where people study and pray. The article interviews two newcomers to Judaism, one of whom stated, I go there with students from abroad and we study there about what it means to come to Judaism from another faith. Many writers over the generations have mentioned visiting the tomb of Ruth and Jesse. Medieval references, one of the earliest known references to the tomb, comes from an unnamed student of the Rambam who visited the site between 1289 and 1290. He wrote of visiting the cave of Jesse's grave on a hilltop near the cave of Machpelah and the ancient Jewish cemetery of Hebron. His words were reprinted in a collection of travel diaries of medieval Jewish travelers entitled Masiot Eretz Yisrael, edited by bibliographer Abraham Yeri. The Jewish traveler Yaakov HaShaliach mentions visiting the grave of Jesse, father of David, in Hebron in the year 1235, but he does not specify the burial place. These comments were reprinted by the historian Julius Eisenstein in his 1927 book, Atzar Maseoth, an anthology of itineraries by Jewish travelers. Michelum de Volterra, the Italian Jewish traveler who began his journey in 1481, wrote about the site in his journal. It has been reprinted in Elkan Nathan Adler's book, Jewish Travelers in the Middle Ages, 19 first-hand accounts, as well as in a book by Abraham Moshe Luntz and in Abraham Yari's seminal Zichronot Eretz Israel, a Hebrew work in 2 volumes which runs to over 1,200 pages. And I thought my book was large. Mine's 858. In 1522, Rabbi Moshe Basola wrote, at the summit of the mountain opposite Hebron is the burial place of Jesse, David's father. It has a handsome building with a small window that looks down on the burial cave. They say that once they threw a cat through the window and it emerged from the hole in the cave of the patriarchs. The distance between them is half a mile. I wonder what happened to the sweet cat. Rabbi Basola's travel journal has been reprinted in Zion and Jerusalem, the itinerary of Rabbi Moses Basola, 1512 to 1523, edited by Abraham David. The full text can be viewed online. 2 Karaite travelers wrote of the site. Their names were Samuel ben David of Crimea, who wrote in 1642, and Benjamin ben Eliyahu, who wrote in 1785. The 1537 book, Yehos Ahavos v'Navim, Lineage of the Patriarch and Prophets, describes the tomb as a handsome building up on the mount where Jesse the king, David's father, is buried. It includes a drawing of the site and notes an ancient Israelite burial ground nearby and Crusader courtyard. Non-Jewish visitors have written about the site from their perspective as well. In 1553, Spanish Franciscan traveler Juan Pereira wrote, somewhat higher up in the direction of the hill, there is a church called the Church of the 40 Martyrs and is now a mosque. Well, of course, they took it over. The source, the Churches of the Crusader Kingdom of Jerusalem. Corpus, Volume 2 by Professor Dennis Pringle, page 203. Franciscus Quiremisius, 1583 to 1650, wrote, opposite Hebron, on the top of a hill, is a small church which I believe, from the indications that are discernible beside it, was formerly larger. Perhaps this is the chancel of the pre-existing church. Now it is converted into a mosque of the Turks and held in honor not by Christians but by the selfsame Turks, who forbid them entry, allowing them merely to look inside through a certain window that is in it. It is known by two names. The Christians call it the Church of the 40 Martyrs, the Turks and many other Orientals the Tomb of Jesse, which they say is Ishay. Both narratives were chronicled in the Churches of the Crusader Kingdom of Jerusalem, a Corpus Volume 2 by Professor Dennis Pringle, which is page 203-4. Historian Mujir al-Din, 1456 to 1522, wrote, "The martyr sanctuary of the 40 outside the town on the western side, on the summit of the mountain, there is a mosque called the Sanctuary of the 40. It is said that the 40 martyrs are buried in it. I could not find any reliable transmitted report to confirm it. People go there to perform the ziyarah. It is a familiar place." His words were chronicled in that same book that I just mentioned. Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Kamenetz, considered the first hotelier in the land of Israel, wrote about the site in his 1839 book entitled Sefer Kurot HaAtim, later translated into English as Book of the Occurrences of the Times to Jerusalem in the Land of Israel. For the sake of context, the entire paragraph from his book is included here. And it says, "Here I write of the graves of the righteous, to which I pay my respects. Hebron, described above, is the character and order of behavior of those coming to pray at the cave of Machpelah. I went there between the stores over the grave of Avner ben Ner and was required to pay a yishmali. The grave was in his courtyard to allow me to enter. Outside of the city, I went to the grave of Othinel ben Kenaz, and next to him are laid to rest 9 students in niches in the wall of a shelter standing in a vineyard. I gave 20 perez to the owner of the vineyard. Also, the vineyard was a shelter with 2 graves, one of Jesse, father of David, and one of Ruth the Moabite. I gave the vineyard owner 20 perez. I also went to a grave said to be that of righteous Rav, author of Reshit Chokmah, Rabbi Eliyahu Davidis, 16th century Kabbalist and disciple of Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, who died in Hebron." Lady Judith Montefiore mentions the site in the posthumously published Notes from a Private Journal of a Visit to Egypt and Palestine by way of Italy and the Mediterranean in 1885, and she states, "While the fete was being prepared, we rode up the hill to visit some ancient tombs, one of which was that of Jesse, the father of David, and at which we said our evening prayers, joined by 8 Israelites who had accompanied us. Returning down the hill, the sight that presented itself to us might have employed a painter's skill." In May of 1811, Rabbi Chaim Yeshua Bajayo of Hebron made the second of 2 purchases on behalf of the community through the Magen Avot organization. This area encompassed 800 dunam of land, including that area of Tel Hebron, later known as Tel Ramida, and the tombs of Ruth and Jesse. In the mid to late 1800s, the Jewish community obtained the land. A document in Arabic from 1882 attests to the Jewish community being granted perpetual rights in reference a court in Gaza which had jurisdiction over Hebron and most of the southern region at the time. Photographs of the original Ottoman deeds, known as Kushan, have been reprinted in Oded Avasar's seminal book, Sefer Hebron. It shows a copy of the deed for the tombs and surrounding land, and it's on page 52 from the Sefer Hebron. Non-Jewish visitors came to the city, such as an American writer and abolitionist John D. Paxton, author of 1839 book about his travels. Although he exhibits an attitude of skepticism and relied on a translator during his tour, his perspective on the tomb of Jesse and Ruth is noteworthy when he writes, "While rambling along the olive trees that almost cover the hill to the southwest of town, we came to the ruins of an old building which must have been a place of some consequence formerly, but is now wholly deserted. Our guide took us into it, and in one of the rooms showed us a small hole in the wall, which he told us was the tomb of Jesse, father of David. The Jews who were with us certainly showed much reverence for the place, pulling off their shoes and performing other acts of regard. It is not impossible that Jesse may have died in Hebron, notwithstanding Bethlehem was his usual place of residence. When David came under the jealousy of Saul and was obligated to flee, his family fled with him, and David had to provide for and protect his father and mother. It's not unlikely that while he reigned in Hebron and the sons of Saul over the rest of Israel, his family may have resided with him. Jesse, who was an old man when David was anointed, may have finished his days while his son lived and reigned in Hebron." Paxton also notes he and his tour group were not allowed to enter the tomb of Machpelah. He mentions visiting a synagogue, possibly the Abraham Avinu synagogue, where he was shown a Torah scroll he describes as a most splendid roll of the law. And he adds, "A few years ago, when Abraham Pasha's troops took Hebron, they committed great outrages on the Jews by plundering them of all they could find. They broke into their synagogue and opened all parts of it in which they thought anything could be found, mutilated and tore their roll of the law, and perpetrated many other enormities. Hebron is esteemed by the Jews as a sacred city, and they think it is a great privilege to live here." Dean Stanley wrote in his 1862 book, Sermons from the East, about the theory that the ruins were once part of a structure built by Jewish royalty. Somewhat higher up the hill is a ruin called the Deir Arbain, the convent of the 40 martyrs, consisting of old masonry which Dr. Rosen conjectures to be the remains of the fortress built at Hebron by Rehoboam. In a corner of this building is the so-called tomb of Jesse. Isn't that cool? So during the British Mandate era, which was 1917 to 1948, the site was included on a list of holy places in the land of Israel. The famous tour book writer and Israeli geographer Zev Vilnay wrote that he toured the tomb in 1935 and was unable to investigate the site in much depth. He noted that an Arab attendant told him that the tomb led to a cave which then leads to the tomb of Machpelah, but that it had been filled in during the First World War, and the entrance was now unknown. Israeli archaeologist Jacob Pinkerfield, 1897 to 1956, visited the site and wrote about it in his book, The Synagogues in Eretz Israel. He was one of the 4 archaeologists killed in the Ramat Rachel shooting attack. Louis Hughes Vincent, 1872 to 1960, a French monk and archaeologist who lived in Jerusalem, wrote about the site in his 1923 2-volume work in French entitled Hebron. The Jordanian period, from 1948 to 1967, Jews and Israelis had virtually no access to Hebron and other areas that had fallen to Jordan during the War of Independence. Many sites were destroyed, such as the Abraham Avinu synagogue. Others, like the tomb of Jesse and Ruth, fell into neglect. During this period, the AEH Hammond excavations took place in the area between 1963 to 1966, led by Professor Philip Hammond of the Princeton Theological Seminary. After the Six-Day War of 1967, efforts were made to once again make the site a place of worship. It remained neglected until the mid-1970s at the initiative of Professor Ben Zion Tzavgar, 1930 to 1983, and the entrance was reopened. Professor Tzavgar, a resident of Hebron, went on to uncover the historic Abraham Avinu Synagogue and other sites. And he wrote about his excavations in the book, My Hebron. Several excavations took place after the area became open to the general public, although the actual tomb complex has not been disturbed. Dr. Avi Offer excavated the area between 1984 and 1986, and archaeologist Yuval Peleg excavated the site in 1998. Emanuel Eisenberg of the Israeli Antiquities Department excavated the site in 1999, discovering numerous artifacts, such as stairs dating to 4,000 years ago and numerous seals with an inscription in ancient Hebrew reading, "To the King, Hebron." In 2014, Professor Eisenberg and his Israeli Antiquities Authority team returned with David Ben Shlomo of Ariel University to again excavate the area. Today, the tombs of Jesse and Ruth continues to inspire the thousands of residents and visitors who visit every year. An active koel and synagogue now exists at the site. So you can make arrangements to contact the Jewish community of Hebron. So that's pretty neat. Now let's look at a little video footage of this archaeological park and the discussion about visit to the tomb of Ruth in Hebron. The stairs, there's that one part of the wall that dates to the time of Noah from the Bible, and then adjacent to it is another wall from a later period, and in between, in Hebron, are the actual stairs that King David himself likely was walking upon all the time, since he ruled in Hebron as the king.
We're now standing at the tomb of Jesse and Ruth, Ishay and Ruth. Jesse, Ishay, was King David's father, Ruth his great-grandmother. The archaeologists believe that this is the site where David, when he came to Hebron and ruled here for 7.5 years, built and established the first city of David on the highest point in Tel Hebron. And the archaeologists believe if they dug here, they would find underneath where we're standing at the moment, the first city of David and also his palace. The building behind us, known as the Tomb of Jesse and Ruth, was originally built here over 1,000 years ago. Today this building houses a small synagogue and study hall where people can come and study and pray. Now in Tel Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Sarah and Rebekah and Leah lived almost 4,000 years ago. Today we can see some of what was here back in the days when the patriarchs and the matriarchs lived here. First, we have here a wall. Today this wall is 3 meters high. It used to be 10 meters high, 6 meters deep, and it was built 4,500 years ago. That is in the days of Noah. Opposite that wall is another wall which was built 3,700 years ago during the days of Abraham. Between the two walls are very, very beautiful stone stairs that are over 4,000 years old. And the archaeologists have told us that at the end of the stairs going out into the street, if we kept digging down, we would discover the gates to the city of Hebron. Please remember that it was at the gates to the city that Abraham purchased the caves of Machpelah for 400 silver shekels. It's very, very possible that this is where Abraham stood and purchased Marat Machpelah for the Jewish people almost 4,000 years ago. And what's so amazing is not that Abraham was here then, but that we still live here today. Here are two old Jewish homes. This one is 4,000 years old, and here in the middle with the columns is a home built 2,700 years ago during the days of King Hezekiah. That is the time of the first temple. A very, very interesting and most important artifact was discovered in this house. Here were found seals in stone with written on them in ancient Hebrew the word Lamelech, belonging to the king, and underneath the seal on the bottom again in ancient Hebrew the word Hebron. when the archaeologists discovered these seals, they told us if anybody had any doubts as to whether this is the ancient biblical Hebron, those doubts have all been erased. They said we have positive proof that Jews have lived here since the days of Abraham.
What you're looking at are the stairs that they found that go between those two walls, the one from the time of Noah and the later one. And these stairs are steps that King David would have walked upon, and probably Jesse, and maybe even Ruth, and maybe even Abraham. Pretty incredible, huh? And let me just tell you a little bit more about those steps there. The history of the 4,000-year-old steps in Hebron. 4,000-year-old steps discovered in 1999 attest to Hebron's rich past. Some of this may be repeated from what I said before, but some of it's new. In 1999, the Tel Hebron excavations began, which uncovered the Bronze Age steps and other priceless historic artifacts. These discoveries led to the subsequent 2014 dig, which today has been open to the public as the Tel Hebron Archaeological Garden under the auspices of the Israeli Parks and Nature Authority. The 2018 grand opening, which was attended by government ministers and top elected public officials, had its beginnings back in 1999. Dr. Emanuel Eisenberg of the Israeli Antiquities Authority led the dig in Tel Hebron. The mostly empty tract of land in the old city of Hebron for many years had been strewn with garbage. A small, noisy, locally owned factory and randomly built homes surrounded the field where evidence of Abraham and Sarah's life in Hebron was discovered. In what is today's Admot Ishay neighborhood, near the tomb of Jesse and Ruth, is a flight of stairs over 4,000 years old, leading from the valley below into the ancient city of Hebron. Also discovered nearby was a 4,500-year-old wall from the early Bronze era. On the biblical timeline, this corresponds to the story of Noah and the Ark. Man! Eisenberg can also chalk up another amazing discovery, that of a 4-room house or Israelite house dating 2,700 years old from the time of King Hezekiah. In the vicinity of this home were found 5 seals called the King Seals or Elimelech seals, bearing the impression of a bird or a beetle with the word Lamelech, Hebron, meaning belonging to the king, Hebron, in Paleo Hebrew, which was one of the earliest versions of Hebrew. When I had studied some archaeologist discoveries that were around the Temple Mount area in the southeast angle or the southeast corner of the Temple Mount, about 80 feet down, the British archaeologist discovered these Elimelech king seals that also had the bird on it with the words Elimelech belonging to the king. So those were found 80 feet down on that southeast corner of the Temple Mount. So you know that a king was there. And these are the same seals they found here in Hebron. And of course we know that King David ruled in both places. These seals were embedded on the bottom of handles on clay jars containing food to be distributed to soldiers in the then Judean army who were fighting a war against Sennacherib, who also invaded Hebron and burned it to the ground. I like to call him Snack on a Rib. Stone pillars discovered at the Israelite house are stained with patches of black, which Professor Eisenberg determined were from the remains of the fire which ravaged Hebron. Some hypothesize that the Arabic name Tel Rameda comes from the word for fire. The existence of the king's seals were not news to archaeologists. Several thousand were discovered in a variety of places throughout the greater Hebron Hills region decades ago, but the 1999 excavations uncovered to the king Hebron, actually in Hebron. One of the time periods unaccounted for is that of King David's reign. For 7 years, Hebron was the capital of the Jewish kingdom before Jerusalem. Professor Eisenberg stated that most probably David's original city of David was located on the highest point of Tel Hebron in an area yet to be examined. This leads some to ponder whether the hilltop where the old stone structures known as the tomb of Jesse and Ruth contains ruins of what once belonged to King David. Well, duh, most likely. I wish they'd excavate. Previous excavations of the site include the Philip Hammond dig for Princeton Theological Seminary from 1964 to 66 and the dig from 1984 to 86 of Professor Avi Ofer of Tel Aviv University. Above the ancient Israelite house is a modern Israeli residential apartment building with the excavations open to the public at ground level. Regarding the 4,000-year-old steps that you just saw, is this the entrance to the gate of the city as described in Genesis 23:10? Is this where Abraham purchased the cave of Machpelah? The time periods match up, but archaeologists would like to one day excavate further. One thing is for sure, for the local residents, the sense of history and the feeling that the Jewish people have returned to their ancestral homeland gives their place of residence extra meaning. So let's look a little bit at Genesis 23. And this is the death and burial of Sarah. Now Sarah lived to be 127 years old. She died in Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan, and Abraham went out to mourn and weep for her. Then Abraham got up from beside his dead wife and said to the Hittites, I am a foreigner and an outsider among you. Give me a burial site among you so that I can bury my dead. The Hittites replied to Abraham, Listen to us, sir. You are God's chosen one among us. Bury your dead in the finest of our tombs. None of us will withhold his tomb for burying your dead. And then Abraham rose and bowed down before the people of the land, the Hittites. If you are willing for me to bury my dead, he said to them, listen to me and approach Ephron, son of Zohar, on my behalf, to sell me the cave of the Machpelah that belongs to him. It is at the end of his field. Let him sell it to me in your presence for full price, so that I may have a burial site. Now Ephron was sitting among the sons of Heth, and in the presence of all the Hittites who had come to the gate of his city, Ephron the Hittite answered Abraham, No, my lord, listen to me. I give you the field, and I give you the cave that is in it. I give it to you in the presence of my people. Bury your dead. Again, Abraham bowed down before the people of the land and said to Ephron in their presence, If you will please listen to me, I will pay you the price of the field. Accept it from me so that I may bury my dead there. And Ephron answered Abraham, Listen to me, my lord. The land is worth 400 shekels of silver. But what is that between you and me? Bury your dead. Abraham agreed to Ephron's terms and weighed out for him the price he had named in the hearing of the Hittites, 400 shekels of silver according to the standard of the merchants. So Ephron's field at Machpelah, near Mamre, the cave that was in it, and all the trees within the boundaries of the field were deeded over to Abraham's possession in the presence of all the Hittites who had come to the gate of his city. After this, Abraham buried his wife Sarah in the cave of the field at Machpelah near Mamre, that is, Hebron, in the land of Canaan. So the field and its cave were deeded by the Hittites to Abraham as a burial site. And then we see in 2 Samuel 2, David was anointed king of Judah. And it came to pass after this that David inquired of the Lord, saying, Shall I go up into any of the cities of Judah? And the Lord said to him, Go up. And David said, Whither shall I go up? And he said, Unto Hebron. So that was a direct order by God for him to go to Hebron. So David went up thither, and his 2 wives also, Ahinoam the Jezreelitess, and Abigail, Nabal's wife, the Carmelite. And his men that were with him did David bring up, every man with his household, and they dwelt in the cities of Hebron. And the men of Judah came, and there they anointed David king over the house of Judah. And they told David, saying that the men of Jabesh Gilead were they that buried Saul. And David sent messengers unto the men of Jabesh Gilead, and said unto them, Blessed be ye of the Lord, that ye have showed this kindness unto your Lord, even unto Saul, and have buried him. And now the Lord show kindness and truth unto you, and I also will requite you to this kindness, because you have done this thing. And be ye valiant, for your master Saul is dead, and also the house of Judah have anointed me king over them. But Abner the son of Ner, captain of Saul's host, took Ishbosheth the son of Saul, and brought him over to Mahanaim, and made him king over Gilead, and over the Asherites, and over Jezreel, and over Ephraim, and over Benjamin, and over all Israel. Ishbosheth, Saul's son, was 40 years old when he began to reign over Israel, and reigned 2 years. But the house of Judah followed David. In the time that David was king in Hebron, over the house of Judah was 7 years and 6 months. So the bottom line is that when King David was anointed there in Hebron, that he would have used those very stairs that they unearthed. And they had already been there 4,000 years ago, and King David was a little over 3,000 years ago. So they had been there for a very long time already. So that was really neat, because it said that, and his men that were with him did David bring up, every man with his household, and they dwelt in the cities of Hebron. And the men of Judah came, and there they anointed David king over the house of Judah. And it sounds to me like they buried Saul in Hebron. So these excavations in this area are extremely important, because it's incredible that they already found the Elimelech seals that said belonging to the king, Hebron. And also I told you that I had previously read in an archaeological excavation book of Sir Charles Warren that those Elimelech belonging to the king seals are also buried at the corner of the Temple Mount. And this shows, you know, King David ruled in Hebron and he ruled in Jerusalem. So all of these archaeological artifacts are astounding. And think about this, since King David was one of the most prominent biblical characters, which is a real-life human being that was a king, since he is so famous, there's no doubt that there would be things preserved there that belonged to King David during his reign. And they would have been preserved, whether they're, you know, synagogues that have yet to be unearthed that are built over the top of the anointing spot, only time will tell. But as we get closer to King Jesus descending from heaven to reign as the eternal King of Judah from the Davidic Dynasty, it's more than likely more of these belongings of King David would be unearthed, honoring his ancestors, as well as Ruth and Jesse, and I just think it's thrilling.